with Dennis Ross, Ambassador Dennis Ross, who's the co-chairman of JPPI's board of directors and professional guiding council. Dennis joined JPPI back in 2011 after serving as a special assistant to President Obama and the National Security Council senior director for the Central region, and basically just a long-time diplomat and hand, if we could call it that, at Mideast peace, and author of a number of books, and an expert on everything that I think has to do with Israel and the United States. So Dennis, it's great to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Yaakov. Always good to be with you.
Thank you. You've seen, obviously you wrote the foreword for JPPI's annual assessment. And I think that one of the big takeaways, obviously, this year is, and it's, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out, but there is also the real rift that's ripping apart this country. I can tell you that this morning I'm driving with my kids to take them to school, and you see people out at 7 a.m. protesting outside Prime Minister Netanyahu's house. And I'm all fine with the people protesting, but going out at 7 a.m., right? It wasn't a small group of people, hundreds of people. Like, these people, it breaks your heart to see how much pain and anguish people are in, whether it's right or wrong. And we see how American Jews, because we polled for the first time in the annual assessment, we polled what American Jews are feeling towards Israel. And it's changing their assessment and how they feel. So why don't you give me kind of just from your perspective, your vantage point in the United States, how are you looking at what's happening here?
First, I think it is the right topic to start with, because it would be the elephant in the room if we weren't talking about it. It is an issue that is seemingly tearing apart the fabric of Israel. And it is not surprising that it has a profound effect on people's attitudes here. I do an annual assessment. I do an annual seminar, actually with Tom Friedman at a synagogue that we founded. And it won't surprise you that nearly everybody there only wanted to talk about this.
Right.
It is preoccupying for American Jewry. There probably isn't a shul in the country that didn't see this as a focal point of discussions. It is, I try to put at one level an interesting light on it, at least from an American standpoint, especially for those who want to question the relationship with Israel. I say nowhere on the planet is there an awakening with a groundswell, a movement that is grassroots, that is determined to preserve a democratic identity. Nowhere will you find anything like it except in Israel.
Yeah.
And
by the way, no democracy. Like, we're used to seeing protests, Arab Spring, if people go back, and you remember that well, in a lot of these authoritarian regimes, but you don't see a sustained protest like this in a democracy. I think that also explains why people are so obsessed with what's happening here, right?
I think that's right. It's the durability of it, but it's also the fact that it's durable is a very clear manifestation that Israel is a democracy. I mean, this couldn't happen any place. The Arab Spring, these were not demonstrations that lasted a long time because they weren't allowed to last a long time. Right. In Israel, it is still unthinkable that these kinds of demonstrations would be suppressed. There is the ability to, not only to protest and to demonstrate, to have the right to assemble. All that is there, and these are protected rights in Israel. And they're a reminder that Israel really is the only democracy in the Middle East. I still think that this will have a contagion effect. Look, it's interesting. We saw big demonstrations in Poland, which we hadn't seen. Do I think those would have taken place without what's happening in Israel? I don't think so. I think that the others see this, and it's a reminder that the grassroots has power. So Israel, again, is kind of this interesting incubator of what can be new movements, new ideas. What we're seeing in Israel that is different from a purely Israeli standpoint is the sense that the that the country itself is being threatened in terms of its identity in a way we've never seen before.
Right.
And you're describing driving at 7 a.m. in the morning, and this is not 10 people out in front of the prime minister's residence. It's a couple hundred, and they're motivated. They're strongly motivated by what they think is at stake. And it permeates the Jewish community here. I would say the vast majority of the Jewish community here very much sympathizes with the grassroots movement that they see in Israel.
So what you're saying, though, Dennis, you're talking about kind of what the silver lining is: incubator, Israel being a democracy, all that.
Right.
But when we looked at when we polled how do American Jews think about the new Israeli government, they're very concerned. Right, it's no longer very new, but they're very concerned with what's happening here. So it seems that this, the so-called Israel diaspora rift divide that we've been talking about for forever, is only getting bigger as a result of this.
Well, it is, but let's look at it from two angles. Again, it's my nature to be more optimistic in terms of looking at a problem and not being deterred from trying to deal with it. But on the one hand, you have here in the diaspora, certainly the American diaspora, a greater sense of identity of what's happening with the protest movement there. And that creates a sense of hope about what Israel represents and where it's going. Now, the other angle is when that diaspora looks at this Israeli government, which is the focal point of the protests in Israel, it draws even a stronger sense of antipathy towards it, even a stronger sense that if I would say the predominant view in the Jewish community in the States, which again is, let's say 70% are, if they're identifying, we have those who are not identifying, but those who identify and go to synagogue or go to Jewish community centers, they're predominantly Reform, conservative, Reconstructionists.
Right.
That's 70%, maybe 30%, maybe 25 to 30% are Orthodox. And even the Orthodox are divided between modern Orthodox and those who are less so. That's 70% for sure look at this Israeli government and feel they can't identify with it. They see it as embracing a set of values that are completely foreign to them. They don't see it as embodying, the kind of liberal, traditional Jewish values. And so they tend to also view the struggle going on in Israel as one that is very much about what the future of Israel will be, and will it be a state of the Jewish people? And when I say that, there are, again, I put a very significant percentage of American Jewry somehow says, how can Israel be the state of the Jewish people when people like us are either not considered Jewish or our views and our attitudes and our values are completely dismissed? That's what is the real danger.
And our way of prayer, right, with the whole Western Wall situation and all that, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
No, completely. Look, again, I don't want to over personalize it, but if I were to describe the questions that I got during the seminar, they were very much geared towards that. Mm-hmm. It was, and you described it quite well in terms of on your 7 a.m. drive. There's great angst.
Yeah.
I mean, this is you see emotional pain. You see it here. I mean, people want to have an attachment to Israel. The Jewish community in this country wants to have an attachment to Israel. They see it as something that is important for the Jewish future. And they worry about those in this Israeli government, people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in particular. They worry about what they're going to do to Israel and their ability to identify with it.
I like the silver, what you talked about is kind of this almost a Zionist awakening to an extent, that because people care, they're more engaged, and we can hope, okay, so we have this engagement. That's like one of the things that I've said is the silver lining in Israel is you can't be apathetic to what's happening. People taking the flag, going out, hundreds of thousands of people, they're re-engaged. It's a Zionist reawakening. The challenge that I think we'll all face, because one day this judicial reform and this government will pass from this world. And then the challenge that we'll face as a state of Israel, but also as a Jewish people, in your shul as an example, right, is what do we do with this energy now? How do we channel it to serve a positive role for the Jewish people and for the Jewish future? And because we'll lose, this battle or this issue will go away, but we have to use this energy in a positive, in some positive form, right?
No, I think that's a really important insight, because there is a paradox here. The level of energy and even mobilization that exists not just in Israel but in the Jewish community here is driven by this fear. So, look, one nice thing about democracies is you have elections and you can have accountability and so forth. And you look at the polling, which has been very consistent. The people in this government don't want an election anytime soon, because we've seen for the first time in more than a decade, all the movement in the last decade was within blocks. It wasn't between them.
And now you're seeing blocks. Yeah,
clearly that's the case. So the question becomes, okay, now that you've been sort of re-energized about your identity, your attachment to Israel, what can be done to build on that? And I would hope one of the things that will be done to build on it is a much more outgoing effort on the part of the next Israeli government to do outreach to the diaspora, to promote, I would like to see a real effort to promote more visits by those in the Jewish community here to Israel. I say that because there's a lot of people who have been to Israel many, many times. You look at the number of American Jews who've been to Israel, if you just looked at the number of visits, it's misleading, because it tends to be the same group of
people coming back. Yeah.
Right. And there are a lot of people, a lot of Jews who've never been to Israel. I would really like to see much more outreach to the Jewish community here to encourage coming to Israel. I always focus on the non-Jews going to Israel, because I think their experience in going to Israel is profound. It opens their eyes. They have no idea this is what Israel is. But in a lot of ways, that's true for major parts of the American Jewry, the diaspora here as well.
Right.
Their attachment, my feeling is those who go to Israel come back with a very different attachment than they had before they went. So I have, again, personal examples. My brother went recently. I mean, look, he kind of lives vicariously through me, but he went for the first time. And, the way he came back, it's, now he has this unbelievable sense of identity that was much more implicit before than it is. And I think in a lot of ways, he's symptomatic of those who haven't ever been kind of loosely identified, go, and then their view is, you go, this is such a dynamic society. And you look at it and it's, we can, even now, when you look at the protests are a part of its dynamism. And it's impossible not to go and see, how far it's come. I mean, I've been going since I was a student. I don't even know how many times I've been in Israel.
Too many to count.
Well, it's at least 1,000 times, and well, plus I go for now. I used to make a lot of short trips. Now I go for a fewer number of longer trips, but that's because I have grandkids there, so it affects the level of my incentive for being there.
Right. So Dennis, one of the things that this also kind of ties into is all the diplomatic happenings that are going on right now. We saw, for example, it's interesting. We had Netanyahu's trip to New York in mid-September. Finally had that meeting with President Biden. Not at the White House, on the sidelines. The president invited him to visit the White House by the end of the year. We'll see if that actually happens, but it seems like it probably will. Week later, you have the announcement that Israel is the 41st country to join the visa waiver program, something that's been working on for a while, but a big step showing the strength, the vitality of the relationship between the two countries. But that tension is still there, and kind of over all of this is hovering the big Saudi normalization deal, right? So walk us through, how does this administration look at Israel right now and the government? Is it as tense as we seem to think it sometimes is here in Israel? And is this, what are your prospects for the Saudi peace deal, especially considering the Palestinian factor and this kind of joker card that it's unclear how Israel can even give anything to them with the makeup of the coalition. So it's a lot to unpack, but
yeah. So let me take it sort of one item at a time. It shouldn't be surprising that if there is this kind of focal point that is really, I think, powerfully continuing on the nature of the protests and demonstrations in Israel, reflected then again in the Jewish community here, it would be remarkable if it didn't have an effect on the administration, especially when you have the only president who's ever declared himself a Zionist.
Right.
Not a small thing. Zionism as a term has been vilified, has been misportrayed, has been used as a kind of mobilizing event for all of the anti-Zionists, all those who want to delegitimize Israel. So suddenly you have a president who proudly says and identifies as being a Zionist. For him not to be moved by what he sees happening in Israel, what he sees happening in the Jewish community, to think that he's not hearing. He has very strong connections to people within the Jewish community for for really his whole career. And for him not to be moved and affected by that is simply unrealistic. So he has been affected by it, for sure. And it's not that he's trying to say to Prime Minister Netanyahu, here's what your judicial reform has to be. He's never gotten into, here's what it should be. I'll tell you, how to design it. He wouldn't do that. He's too much of a politician.
Right.
He would not do that. But what he's basically saying is, I care so much about Israel, I don't want to see it torn apart. It matters to me. And it matters to me also because the U.S.-Israeli relationship is important to me, and it's important to the United States. And your enemies see this as a sign of weakness. And when we see signs about what's happening with the fabric of the military, how can I not be concerned about that? So what he's basically saying to him is he's saying, okay, you want to do this, I get there may be a need for some reform, but you can't do it in a way that tears the country apart. If this is so fundamental, if it's so important to do it, and this gets to the fundamental issue of separation of powers, then by definition, it needs to be done with a broad consensus and not simply imposed. And that's been the essence of his message. And I think it's an emotional one for him. It's not just a kind of, an analytical one, or it's even a broad, a political one. It is something that matters to him given who he is. And I think it's had, look, on the one hand, Bibi doesn't want to look like he's being told what he's going to do by the American president. On the other hand, he can't be indifferent to what Biden is suggesting to him, because Biden is also the key to whether or not there's going to be a breakthrough with the Saudis. Uh-huh. It is true, it is a fact that the motivating factor for the Saudis is what they're going to get from us. That is a fact. And the desire to get a defense treaty, I like to say, I said this, I was doing a public event the other day here in Washington, and I was on a panel with people who were saying, look at how countries in the region, they don't trust the United States anymore. So I responded by saying, it's true. I hear that all the time when I go to the region. The U.S. isn't reliable. And I hear it everywhere. It's not just Israel. I hear, I go to Saudi Arabia a couple of times a year, and I say, but isn't it interesting? What's the first thing that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is asking for? He's asking for a defense treaty with the United States. Mm-hmm. He wants a security guarantee from the United States. If we're perceived as so unreliable, if we're perceived as not the answer to their problems, that's why they hedge bets, why is he asking for that?
Right.
What it says is ultimately they still look at us as the only one who can truly guarantee their security. It is a reminder of the American strength, the enduring American strength. I'm not dismissing questions about us, but it's an interesting reminder of that, number one. So he wants that. He wants the kind of access to weaponry that goes with that, and then he wants this nuclear partnership. with the United States. And they
I
want
want to get to
characterize.
I'm going to get to the nuclear thing, but first give me your assessment for the chances that this can succeed.
All right, so
With the deal and the complexity of the deal and the politics and the elections in America,
I'm gonna,
but also our coalition here.
yeah. Well, this really is a Rubik's Cube where you have multiple layers. So it starts with the impetus for this on the Saudi side is wanting this deal with the United States. The impetus for it on the Biden administration side is China. Whatever said, it's China. If we, and I will discuss the nuclear issue more, but to understand one thing, if we don't do the nuclear partnership, then the Chinese are already pushing very hard to come in and develop the Saudi nuclear industry, which would build a long-term Saudi dependency on China. For the administration, they're looking at a long-term competition with China. And if suddenly China gains this enormous leverage in the region because of that, it changes the character geopolitically of our much broader competition with China. So for us, it's about China. Now, for Biden, because it's Biden, it's also about Israel. And in a sense, what you've got the Saudis saying, we'll do normalization with Israel. This is what we need to be able to do it. So we need this defense treaty with you because it could increase security threats to us. That has implications of weaponry. We will compete ultimately with Iran by showing we're a much more successful society than the Iranians are. And one of the ways we're going to do that is because we're going to use our delivery of new forms of producing electricity, meaning renewables, but also nuclear, clean forms. And that, in 20, 25 years, that will replace oil. We'll still be the world's biggest supplier in a sense of energy, but we'll do it through clean means. That's what we want. But we'll normalize in return for that. We'll normalize with Israel. And now, so Biden looks at it through the lens of competition with China on the one hand, and on the other, he says, I can also make not only a big geopolitical change, I can make a big change in the region, and I can do something that historically is of enormous value to Israel in no small part because I'm going to do a deal where the custodian of the two holy mosques is going to make peace,
right?
Full normalization with the state of the Jewish people, Israel. For Biden, this is a big deal. So the Saudis in this, it's true, they don't come to it as the Palestinians as their first item, but it is an item for them. And why is it an item for them? Mostly because when they do it, they want to show when we do it, it's different from when the UAE does it.
Right.
When we do it, others will follow. Now, others will follow. And when they say others, there's some in the region that will follow, but they're thinking Muslim majority, the big Muslim majority countries, they're thinking
Indonesia, Malaysia, those countries.
Yes. And they know they have to have something that they would consider to be meaningful for the Palestinians to point to. Now, MBS made a reference to, life for the Palestinians has to be better. Now, that has implications for movement. So getting from one point to the other shouldn't take you 45 minutes. It should take you 10 minutes if that's the distance. Economics. But they also want to preserve the idea that two states, that what they did, there was enough done to preserve two states as an outcome.
Right.
It's interesting. They're not coming and saying there has to be a state now. They're not talking about the dimension of that state. They're not talking about the attributes of that state. One of the most interesting things to me as someone who's worked on this for so long, they're not taking slogans. They're not falling back on the mythologies. They're actually approaching it from the standpoint, we want something that is practical. We sure as hell don't want the result of what we're doing to guarantee to cement one state. So they're approaching it in a way that for sure will stress this Israeli government.
So you have a lot of Bibi hours under your belt, right? Probably one of the American officials with the most in history. So the man, the makeup of his current coalition.
Yeah.
Assuming Gantz is not coming in and Lapid is not coming in, and that's what they're saying right now, but I take it all with a grain of salt, especially in Israeli politics, because everything can change by tomorrow. Can Bibi pull this off? somehow with this coalition? Is he still
Look,
the
it is it would be an enormous challenge for him. It depends on, he is someone who has demonstrated extraordinary political skill over the course of his career, or he wouldn't be the longest serving Israeli prime minister ever. Now, he's never been in a position where he didn't have room to maneuver within his governments. This is the first government he's had where his room for maneuver is much more limited. And so the question becomes, how well can he maneuver? Can he prevail upon Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to do what I think will be necessary? Will he need to make a choice with his government? I mean, here you're looking at, if he can't prevail upon them, then he has to make a choice between what is a historic breakthrough of great significance. I alluded to it. I mean, it's not just the landscape of the Middle East. It's also the whole idea of a kind of Muslim reconciliation with Jews. This is huge, and Bibi is someone who is could be faced with a choice between this huge achievement or being unable to do it because he's blocked by people within his government. And historically, I would have said he will choose what he thinks ultimately represents the biggest payoff for Israel. Will he do that now? Remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Look, I'm sure he'll try to do his best to deliver something that he thinks can address what the Saudis are asking for. And to be fair, it's not just the Saudis. It is the Biden administration, and it's the Biden administration, again, to get this through the Senate. You need the Israelis for the Republicans.
Right.
But you need Democrats. You got to get to 67. You need Democrats, and he'll have a certain group who will go with him just because he's Biden. But there's another group that group looks at this Israeli government and they don't like it. And they look at Saudi Arabia and MBS and they don't like it. And so for them, the only selling point will be, we've changed the trajectory. We've done something significant for the Palestinians, and we've changed the trajectory.
So Biden also needs, interesting. So it's not just MBS who needs something for the Palestinians, it's also Biden to get the Democrats need something for the Palestinians.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the nuclear thing for a moment, right? So nuclear energy, the MBS wants to have domestic enrichment of uranium, the fuel processing inside Saudi. He said in that Fox News interview recently that during the time of the UN General Assembly, that if Iran goes nuclear, we, the Saudis, will go nuclear. So there's no two sides to this. He wants to have the capability. He might not break out right away for a nuclear weapon, but he wants to have this. So if, God forbid, one day the Iranians do go nuclear and have nuclear weapons, so will Saudi Arabia. Can Israel, in your opinion, live with this situation? Can America guarantee security under such a situation? By the way, I mean, I'll just add to it. It goes against Israel's national defense doctrine, right, of all these years. Now, Saudi has never been an outright enemy of Israel, but we took out the Iraqi reactor in 1981. We took out the Saudi reactor in 2007. We've been working the Syrian reactor, in 2007. We're working against the Iranian nuclear program for the last 20 plus years. Can Israel even allow something like this to happen?
It's complicated to say the least, but I think we have to look at some of the choices. First, point number one, what he said is not new. He's been saying this for a long time. By the way, Saudis have said, he said it for a long time. Saudis said it before. They get a nuclear weapon, we get a nuclear weapon. Right. Part of the reason for them saying it is for deterrence purposes of the Iranians. Do you really want to go for that? Because if you go for it, we'll get it. There has been a long time presumption that Pakistan would provide it to them in the event that Iran got it. So it's not as if the only avenue for them doing this is based on this partnership with us, number one. Right. Number two, if we don't do it and the Chinese come in, there'll be no safeguards at all. No assurances, no safeguards. What is being talked about is an American facility on Saudi soil, run by American technicians, Saudis present, but in a sense, the U.S. controlling the spare parts, a set of commitments and assurances worked out between the two of us. The Saudis, by the way, just for the first time, announced that they will accept full safeguards agreement with the IAEA. That had not been the case before. So, can there be a complete guarantee? No, but you also have to look at the alternatives. If we don't do it, then you'll have no assurances, no guarantees, and the prospect of an unsafeguarded nuclear industry there, very likely to emerge with very little controls, potential controls from the outside. This, I think, at least gives you a greater level of assurance about where this is going, and that it can be controlled. I know the concern is at some point the Saudis could simply kick us out and nationalize it, or MBS won't be there, or there are those concerns, and you have to try to, in the agreement that is worked out, there have to be a number of hedges and safeguards that are built into it. I think we have one of the things that gives me some encouragement about this is some of the technicians from the DOE and people who I've known for a long time who work on these issues and think about technical fixes. They're very much a part of these negotiations with the Saudis. And again, I think what I was saying before, why does he really want it? He doesn't want it to go get a nuclear weapon. One of the things he said is, ironically, he said, you get a nuclear weapon, you can't use it. He said, and the Iranians should understand that you can't use it. But if they don't understand it and they have it, then for the reasons of balance of power, we have to have it. Mm-hmm. I think they want it. In those circumstances, it's partly for the balance of power, it's partly for deterrence, and it's partly to signal that the Iranians won't have a technology or capability we won't have. Again, it fits under the balance of power rubric.
So is there a way for the Americans to offset Israeli security concerns? Like, one of the things that's spoken about here is, so there's the defense pact or the defense agreement that America will sign with the Saudis, but maybe there's some sort of smaller in scope type of defense treaty / pact that America would give Israel. And that could also offset some of those concerns. What's your take on that?
My take on that is a reasonable proposition. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't become part of the package. I think there is some debate within the administration of, are we adding too much of a load to what we'll have to get through the hill if we do a treaty for the Saudis and a treaty for the Israelis? Some in the administration think maybe, others are saying, no, it makes it more likely if we kind of, if we have a package that includes both, maybe it makes it easier to produce support, especially from the Republicans. Look, I have no doubt Bibi will pull out all the stops with it in his relations with the Republicans, and one shouldn't just, one of the things that emerged that worried people that he's been too close to the Republicans and lost the kind of bipartisan character to his relationship. Well, here, one of the ironies right now is, because he's so close to the Republicans, it's very hard for them to oppose him if he's saying this is really in Israel's interest. Well, for Biden, that's essential, because without that, you can't get this through. But then there's the flip side, you need the Democrats. And so, that's where the Palestinians, as I said, come in. But I do think a defense pact or a treaty in these circumstances, the combination of these and the message it sends to the Iranians could be, I think, very important in terms of where the Iranian nuclear program is right now. I'm quite worried about it, because what I see at this point is that the administration, for reasons I understand, has, even though it denies there's any agreements, we see a set of parallel actions. Right. I once thought one of the best ways to deal with the Israelis and Palestinians was just to work out a set of parallel actions that didn't require any formal agreements between them, but let's just work out a set of parallel actions that can be reinforcing. So let me just quickly enumerate some of the things that have been going on between the U.S. and the Iranians. So on the U.S. side, we have agreed, and it's now set up, to allow monies that were frozen in South Korean accounts, where South Korea had bought Iranian oil, while during the Trump administration, while there were waivers permitted for buying that oil, and they actually bought $7 billion worth of Iranian oil that went into account. The Trump administration lifted the waivers, and so that money then got frozen. Because of devaluation of the South Korean currency, that $7 billion became $6 billion. The $6 billion as part of this understanding where these 5 dual US Iranian citizens were released in return for our creating an account in Qatar that it's not like an ATM where they can just come in and withdraw from it. It is an account where if they want to go buy food, medicine, medical devices, they can draw on it from that account, but they have to come in with a specific proposal, meaning for particularly what they're going to buy. That has to be approved, and then they can draw from the account. That's the administration saying, see, it's not like we're just giving them money. But of course, you and I know that money is fungible. So right. If the Iranians now know that they have $6 billion, that they can't do it all at once. It has to be done over time, has to be done for projects. But they now know there's $6 billion they have available not to have to spend on those items. Okay, so we're getting in return for these 5 people being released, and they went through hell. And it's hard. I've been in this position. I've dealt with the families of those who are hostages. It is emotionally difficult not to do everything you can to try to get them out. The problem is, in response to this, you're giving the Iranians an incentive to just grab more people. What we should be doing, we should be working out with the Europeans and understanding no one goes there anymore. That would have an effect on this Iranian regime, because these people bring in hard currency. The families there's a lot of Iranians who live outside, not political, but they go back, and as soon as the Iranians treat them as an asset to be grabbed, then you're right back in the situation. All right, so I want to finish this notion of what's been going on. So there's a $6 billion. There is another almost $3 billion that was released, that monies in Iraq that are frozen. Same thing, where they actually were buying gas from the Iranians, and so these accounts were frozen, and we allowed $2.75 billion to be released. There's another almost $8.25 billion that is under the same category, and that may also be released. Now, partly we do that to be fair. We do that to try to preserve stability within Iraq, but it has, obviously, the Iranians are benefiting from it, and that won't have the same kind of constraint that we've just seen.
Right.
Now, what's happening? What are we getting for it in addition? Well, 2 things have been going on. One, all the attacks from the Shia proxy forces in Iraq and Syria against our presence in Iraq and Syria, they've stopped. Last 3 months, nothing. In addition, they have slowed down their accumulation of enriched material to 60%.
Right.
They didn't stop it. I mean, they were producing 9 kilograms a month at 60%. They've reduced that to 3 kilograms a month. A small amount, about 7 kilograms, were also diluted to less than 60%. Now, they still have about 7 bombs worth overall, probably 3 bombs worth at 60%, probably another 4 at between 20 and around 20%. So they are slowing their accumulation, which means the pressure to go do something about their nuclear program is not as acute as it was. They're in the same level of urgency because they've slowed the accumulation. My problem with that is you've still normalized 60%.
Right.
There's no justification for 60%, none. It's not me saying it. Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, says there's no justifiable civilian purpose for 60%. And as the Iranians continue to harden their nuclear infrastructure, it means that becomes less and less vulnerable. It means military options against it become more and more difficult. And at some point, maybe you don't have a military option. So we're buying time for reasons I understand. The Iranians are accepting the buying time because they see it in their interest, partly because at this point, they have a dialogue with the Saudis, they have a dialogue with the Emiratis. I think all this goes back to their own economic circumstances are very difficult right now. The currency has been devalued very significantly. They know how unhappy their public is at this point. They have, we've just had the anniversary of the killing of Masa Amini. They were very active in terms of making preemptive arrests in advance of it, but they still had small demonstrations around the country. And it will take very little to trigger the next demonstration there. We've seen demonstrations every year there since 2017. They know where their public is. They're managing that. They still, because they're extreme, they passed a law, imposing punishments on women not wearing the hijab. So they don't need to add to their domestic difficulties by heating things up. And that's one of the reasons I think we're seeing them accept, we'll buy some time too. The problem hasn't gone away, and normalizing at 60% means we will have to come up with more. We have to do more in terms of deterrence. I'm afraid we're moving towards a containment policy, which makes me very uneasy.
By the way, it's interesting, you hear it also, Israel toned down, not as vocal as in the past, right? With everything, because basically what you were just talking about, the parallel moves, is almost like a deal without being a deal. And we all remember, you remember 2015, Netanyahu knew how to come all the way to Washington.
That's right.
Congress, but this time, quiet.
That's right. It's similar. Everybody has made the assumption. Look, I think on the Israeli side, to be fair, it's not just those who say it's because he needs Biden to do the Saudi deal. If that's true, but your own military's attitude is we need some time.
Right.
So everybody has a common interest in buying time. The administration would like to buy time through the election. What I'm suggesting to you is, okay, you better be thinking about what you're going to do with the time, and B, you better have a strategy for after. Right now, if you ask me, we're experiencing I used to hear from the Israelis, what's the administration's plan B? This is plan B. What is needed is plan C, because this will play itself out.
Right.
And then we have to have a plan C.
Well, plan C will be next year's annual assessment of JPPI. But for now, Dennis, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Always enlightening, informative, and insightful. So thanks for giving us kind of this tour of force of the region and what's happening here with America, with Israel, with the Saudis, with the Iranians, with the Palestinians. And of course, what I think we all very much care about is the future of the Jewish people. So thanks for being with us.
Yaakov, it's always a pleasure.